The sun hung mercilessly over the desert, a white-hot disk that drained color from everything beneath it. Heat waves shimmered above the parched earth, distorting the horizon like a fever dream. Through this wavering vision, a lone figure appeared, a woman running desperately across the unforgiving terrain. Ihawi's lungs burned with each ragged breath. Her deerskin dress was torn at the shoulder, dark with dried blood where the bullet had grazed her. 3 days of pursuit had left her lips cracked, her throat raw. Still she ran. Behind her, distant but persistent, came the sound of horses and men, hunters tracking prey. She stumbled, catching herself on hands that were scraped raw from falls on rock and cactus. Pain shot through her wounded shoulder. The world tilted, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. Just ahead lay a dry riverbed, a ghost of water that had long since retreated from this forsaken place. If she could just reach it, perhaps hide among the rocks. Her legs finally surrendered. Ihawi collapsed at the edge of the riverbed, her body making a soft thud against the sand. The sound of pursuit grew louder. She turned her face to the sky, unwilling to meet death with her eyes to the ground. The blue above seemed to pulse with her fading heartbeat. A shadow fell across her face. This was it then. The end. But instead of pain, there came a voice, soft, weathered, speaking words she couldn't comprehend through the roaring in her ears. Then darkness claimed her completely. 20 miles away, the town of Broken Ridge squatted beneath the same punishing sun. Unlike the pristine desert, the town was all dust and noise, horses stamping, men shouting, the constant creaking of wagon wheels on hardened dirt. A single main street stretched between weather-beaten buildings, their paint long since surrendered to the elements. Inside the general store, Gabriel Reed stood at the counter, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the worn floorboards. At 40, his face carried more lines than his years warranted, deep grooves beside eyes that had seen too much death. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he kept it longer than most men in town, as if he couldn't be bothered to remember to cut it. "Same as usual, Gabriel?" Harold Winters asked, gathering supplies without waiting for confirmation. The older man's movements were efficient, practiced from decades of serving the same provisions to the same faces. Gabriel nodded, his gaze fixed on a newspaper from 3 weeks ago. News traveled slowly to Broken Ridge. "Heard they're bringing in a wild one today," Harold said, glancing up from the sack of flour he was measuring. Blackwood caught himself an Apache woman trying to steal his horses, bringing her in for the cattle auction. Gabriel's eyes flickered up briefly, then back to the paper. "Not my concern," Harold shrugged. "Just making conversation. Don't get much of that from you." He finished gathering the supplies, tallying the cost on a scrap of paper. "That'll be $3.45. Gabriel placed the coins on the counter, precise and orderly. "Any mail?" "Nothing this week." Gabriel nodded again, gathered his supplies, and stepped back into the glare of day. He loaded his purchases into a weathered wagon, then paused, noticing unusual activity at the far end of the street. A crowd was gathering, voices rising in a mixture of jeers and laughter. He shouldn't get involved. Whatever spectacle had caught the town's attention was none of his business. Gabriel Reed had learned long ago that involvement only led to pain. But something, perhaps the doctor he once was, pulled him toward the commotion. The cattle yard was thick with dust and the stench of animals. Men formed a loose circle around a makeshift platform where Emmett Blackwood, a trader known for his questionable morals, stood beside a woman bound at the wrists. Gabriel recognized her immediately as native, Apache by the pattern on what remained of her dress. She stood straight despite her bonds, chin lifted in defiance, though her eyes revealed bone-deep exhaustion. "Gentlemen," Blackwood's voice carried over the murmurs of the crowd, "a special offer today. Buy a cow, get a working Apache woman for free." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. The woman didn't flinch. "Strong back, doesn't talk much, won't complain about the work." Blackwood continued, grabbing her arm and forcing her to turn so the men could inspect her like livestock. "A real bargain." Gabriel's stomach tightened. He'd seen this before. People treated as property, lives valued by what labor could be extracted. He'd thought he'd left such things behind after the war, but here it was, in broad daylight, sanctioned by silent approval. He moved closer, studying the woman more carefully. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a wound that made Gabriel's medical instincts stir for the first time in years. That was no ordinary injury. It was a bullet wound, partially healed but still angry red against her copper skin. "Starting bid at $5 for the co," Blackwood shouted. "Apache woman comes with it." A few half-hearted bids came from the crowd. The woman's eyes darted around, calculating, as if measuring distances for escape. Gabriel noticed her feet were bare and bloody, clearly having run across rough terrain recently. $5 going once," Blackwood called out. No higher bids came. The crowd was losing interest. Blackwood's face hardened. "Well, if you boys don't appreciate quality when you see it, I know the foreman at Silver Creek Mine does. They're always looking for cheap labor." The mines. Gabriel had treated miners during his brief time in Broken Ridge. He'd seen what happened to those who worked the depths. The crushed limbs, the black lung, the bodies broken beyond repair. Few survived more than a year in those conditions. "I'll take her," Gabriel's voice cut through the yard, surprising even himself. Heads turned. Blackwood's eyes narrowed with interest. "Well, well, the good doctor speaks. You want the cow too, Reed?" "Just her," Gabriel replied, his tone flat but firm. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A man stepped forward, squinting at Gabriel. "What you want with a savage, Doc? Thought you were done with healing folks." Gabriel met the man's gaze steadily. "What I do with her isn't your concern." Blackwood grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Now, Doc, the deal is cow and woman together. Package deal." Gabriel reached into his pocket and placed a small stack of silver dollars on the platform. "That's $15, more than your cow's worth." Blackwood hesitated, greed warring with the desire to make things difficult. Greed won. He scooped up the coins. "She's all yours, Doc, though I never took you for the type to want such company." The woman's breathing quickened, her eyes now fixed on Gabriel. There was no relief in her gaze, only a different kind of calculation. She was merely passing from one captor to another in her mind. Gabriel stepped onto the platform and addressed her directly. "You're coming with me." He didn't touch her, didn't grab or pull. He simply turned and stepped down, expecting her to follow. She hesitated, looking from Gabriel to Blackwood to the crowd. "Move, girl." Blackwood shoved her roughly, nearly sending her toppling off the platform. Gabriel turned back, catching her arm just enough to steady her. The moment she was balanced, he released his grip. That small detail, the immediate release, seemed to register with her. Her eyes met his, questioning. "Let's go," Gabriel said quietly. As they walked away, a voice called from the crowd. "Hey, Reed, you gonna break her in first or put her to work?" Gabriel stopped and turned slowly. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. He simply looked at the man with eyes that had seen battlefields strewn with the dead. The man's laughter died in his throat, and he looked away. Gabriel helped the woman onto the seat of his wagon, then climbed up beside her, keeping a respectful distance. As they pulled away from town, her body remained rigid, hands gripping the edge of the seat. She was clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for his true intentions to reveal themselves. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, the landscape gradually changing from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. Finally, a small ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn, corral, and smokehouse. Nothing fancy but solid, built to withstand both winter cold and summer heat. Gabriel brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. "This is it," he said, the first words spoken since they'd left town. The woman glanced around, taking in the isolation. No neighbors in sight, no one to hear a scream. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the seat harder. Gabriel stepped down, then moved to her side of the wagon. "You can come down. I won't touch you unless you're falling." She studied him for a moment, then carefully climbed down on her own, wincing as her bare feet touched the ground. Up on the ridge behind the cabin, she noticed a row of wooden stakes driven into the ground. 7 of them, evenly spaced, like markers for graves that lacked proper headstones. Gabriel followed her gaze. "Come inside," he said, his voice giving away nothing. The cabin was sparse but clean, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, shelves with basic supplies, a narrow bed in one corner. Tools hung on the walls, practical and well-maintained. No decorations, no personal touches beyond a single bookshelf with medical texts and a few dog-eared novels. Gabriel placed bread and a cup of water on the table. Eat, rest. She didn't move. No one will touch you here, he added, voice low but clear. Her eyes darted to his, searching for lies. She found none, but trust wasn't built so easily. Still, thirst and hunger eventually won out. She approached the table cautiously and took the smallest bite of bread, as if expecting it to be snatched away. Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, gaze fixed on the floor rather than on her torn dress or trembling hands. My name's Gabriel Reed, he said finally. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak through a throat tight with fear and uncertainty. Ahowie. He nodded once, not a smile, not a question, just acknowledgement, respect in its simplest form. You're safe here, he said, moving toward the stove. We'll figure out the rest after you eat. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Ihawi felt her spine relax just slightly. She didn't trust him. Couldn't. Not after everything she'd seen. But she believed one thing. Tonight, at least, she wouldn't be hurt. That was enough for now. Night came quickly over the prairie. The cabin walls held the day's heat, making the interior uncomfortably warm. A single lamp cast long shadows across the rough, wooden floor. Outside, coyotes called to each other in the distance, their yips and howls carrying clearly through the still air. Gabriel had given Ihawi the bed, despite her protests. He'd laid a bedroll near the door, establishing both his position as guard against intruders and a clear boundary between them. Now he sat at the table, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. Ihawi watched his hands, steady, practiced, the fingers long and nimble, despite the calluses. A doctor's hands, though she didn't know that yet. She noticed old scars across his knuckles, and newer ones on his wrists, partially hidden by his sleeves, the kind that came from a knife held in one's own hand. Why did you buy me? She asked suddenly, her English careful but clear, revealing an education beyond what most would expect. Gabriel's hands paused momentarily, then resumed their work. I didn't buy you. I paid Blackwood to let you go. Same thing, she countered. You own me now. No, he said firmly, looking up at her for the first time since they'd entered the cabin. No one owns you here. You're free to leave whenever you want, he paused. Though I wouldn't recommend you trying until your feet heal. Ihawi's brow furrowed. Then why? Gabriel was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set the rifle aside. I need someone to help me bury bodies. The statement hung in the air between them. Ihawi felt cold despite the heat. Was this why he lived so far from town? Was she to be his next victim? Seeing the fear return to her eyes, Gabriel's expression softened slightly. That was a poor attempt at humor. I meant, I've buried enough people. I couldn't watch them send you to the mines. You know what happens there? She asked. He nodded, something dark passing behind his eyes. I was a doctor once. I've treated miners. This new information shifted something in Ihawi's understanding of him. She glanced at his hands again, seeing them differently now. Was, he confirmed, offering nothing more. She should have pressed, should have tried to learn more about this strange man who had paid for her freedom only to give it back to her. But exhaustion pulled at her with relentless hands. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body finally surrendering to the first safe moment it had known in too long. Gabriel noticed. Sleep, he said quietly. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Ihawi meant to stay awake, to keep watch, to be ready to flee if needed. But the soft mattress beneath her, and the knowledge that the door was guarded, not against her escape, but against anyone who might enter, lulled her into the deepest sleep she'd known since her capture. Gabriel remained at the table long after she drifted off, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Only when he was certain she was truly asleep did he roll up his sleeve, revealing the scars that mapped his wrists like rivers, some old and white, others pink and new. Evidence of pain too great to bear in silence, yet insufficient to end his life. He traced one of the scars with his thumb, then rolled his sleeve back down. He had failed to save so many. His wife, his daughter, the countless soldiers who had died under his care during the war. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could help this one woman find her way back to wherever she belonged. It wasn't redemption he sought. He knew better than to believe such a thing was possible. But it was something to do with hands that had forgotten how to heal. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the cabin's single window. Gabriel woke first, as always, his body conditioned by years of military service to rise before dawn. Ihawi still slept, curled tight on her side, one hand clutching the edge of the thin blanket as if afraid it might be taken. He moved quietly, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. The smell eventually roused her. She sat up quickly, eyes wide and alert, scanning the room before memory returned. "Morning," Gabriel said. Ihawi nodded but didn't speak. She watched him carefully, still measuring him, still uncertain. "Your shoulder needs tending," he said, nodding toward her wound. "I can help, if you'll let me." She instinctively covered the injury with her hand. "It's fine." "It's infected," he countered. "I noticed yesterday. If it's not cleaned properly, you could lose the arm. Or worse." Ihawi hesitated, weighing her options. Finally, she gave a small nod of consent. Gabriel gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and a small bottle of alcohol. He approached slowly, making each movement deliberate and visible. He pulled a chair up beside the bed but didn't sit until she indicated it was acceptable. "This will hurt," he warned, dampening a cloth with alcohol. "I know pain," she replied simply. Gabriel worked with the efficiency of long practice, cleaning the wound gently but thoroughly. Ihawi didn't flinch, though the alcohol must have burned like fire. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed her discomfort. "Bullet?" He asked, examining the wound more closely. She nodded. "3 days ago, when I escaped." Gabriel's hand stilled momentarily. "From Blackwood?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate. He continued working, applying a salve from a small tin. "How did you come to be his prisoner?" Ihawi was silent for so long that Gabriel thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, as if reciting events that had happened to someone else. "My people were attacked 2 moons ago. Many died. Some scattered. I was taken." She paused. "I was sold twice before Blackwood." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he kept his touch gentle as he wrapped a clean bandage around her shoulder. "And before the attack?" Something shifted in her eyes, a flash of the person she had been before capture. "I was a healer, like you, but different." "A medicine woman?" She shook her head slightly. "I learned both ways, from the elders and from the mission school." Her eyes met his directly for the first time. "I know your medicine and mine." Gabriel nodded, absorbing this information as he finished with the bandage. "You speak English well." "They insisted," she said, a touch of bitterness in her tone. He didn't ask who they were. He had seen enough of the world to know how the white man's civilization was forced upon native peoples. Instead, he stood and returned the medical supplies to a small shelf. "You should rest today," he said. "Let that shoulder heal. I have work to do outside." Ihawi watched him gather his hat and gloves. "What do you want from me?" she asked as he reached the door. Gabriel paused, his back to her. "Nothing. Everyone wants something." He turned slightly, profile illuminated by the morning light streaming through the door. "Rest, heal. When you're strong enough to decide your own path, you will." With that, he stepped outside, closing the door softly behind him. Ihawi stared at the door for a long time after he left. In her experience, men did not give without expecting something in return, especially the white men. There had to be a price for this shelter, this care. She just hadn't discovered it yet. She rose carefully, testing her strength. Her body ached from days of running and rough treatment, but she could stand, could walk. She moved to the window, watching as Gabriel crossed the yard to the barn. His movements were efficient, purposeful, those of a man accustomed to working alone. The cabin was small enough that she could explore it thoroughly in minutes. A trunk at the foot of the bed contained spare clothing. All male, all practical. A shelf held a few books, medical texts mostly, with a worn Bible and a copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass that had been read so often the spine had cracked. In a small box on the highest shelf, she found the only personal items in the entire cabin: a tarnished wedding band, a child's wooden doll, and a daguerreotype of a woman with a solemn expression holding an infant. Gabriel's wife and child, presumably. Both gone now, if his solitary existence was any indication. Ihawi quickly replaced these items when she heard footsteps on the porch. Gabriel entered, carrying an armload of firewood. If he noticed her standing by the shelves, he didn't comment. There are clothes in the trunk that might fit you, he said, stacking the wood beside the stove. My wife was smaller than you, but anything's better than... He gestured vaguely toward her torn dress. Ihawi nodded. Thank you. He turned to leave again, but paused at the door. I'll be working the north pasture today. If you need anything, fire the rifle once. He nodded toward the gun he'd cleaned the night before, now hanging on pegs above the door. You would give me a weapon? A ghost of a smile touched his lips for the first time. I said you're free. I meant it. Then he was gone again, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Ihawi stood motionless in the center of the cabin, trying to understand this strange man who spoke to her as an equal, who tended her wounds with a doctor's skill, yet lived like a hermit with grief as his only companion. Who would give a rifle to a woman he barely knew? A woman most in town would consider a savage. She moved to the trunk and found a simple cotton dress that would indeed be too small, but with adjustments might serve until her own clothing could be properly repaired. As she changed, her gaze was drawn to the window in the ridge beyond, where those 7 stakes stood like sentinels against the sky. Not grave markers, she realized suddenly. Something else. Something a man might drive into the earth when his hands needed to create rather than destroy. Something to remind himself that life continued, even in this harsh land where more things died than lived. Fence posts. Unfinished. Abandoned mid-task when the will to continue had failed. Ihawi understood then what she was seeing, not just a man who had lost family, but a man who had lost purpose. The unfinished fence told a story no words could convey. It spoke of attentions interrupted by grief, of work begun with hope and abandoned in despair. She knew something of that feeling. She had been building her own life when raiders had destroyed her village, killed her family, torn her from everything familiar. She had been in the middle of becoming someone, a bridge between 2 worlds, using knowledge from both to heal. That journey too had been violently interrupted. Perhaps that was why Gabriel Reed had recognized something in her at the auction. Perhaps he had seen his own interrupted life reflected in her eyes. Ihawi moved to the door and opened it, stepping onto the porch for the first time as something other than a captive. The sun was climbing, its heat already building, but the air still carried the lingering coolness of night. She drew a deep breath, savoring the simple freedom of standing under an open sky without chains or watching eyes. In the distance, she could see Gabriel working, a solitary figure against the vastness of land and sky. For the first time since her capture, Ihawi allowed herself to consider a future beyond mere survival. Not hope. That was still too fragile, too easily crushed. But possibility. She glanced back at the rifle above the door. He had given her the means to defend herself, to hunt, to leave if she chose. Trust offered without demand for trust in return. Ihawi stepped back inside and began to put the cabin in order. Not because she was obligated, but because it was the first choice she'd been free to make in a very long time. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Gabriel worked steadily, mending fences in the north pasture, stopping only when the sun stood directly overhead, beating down with merciless intensity. He wiped sweat from his brow, taking a long drink from his canteen. From this vantage point, he could see the cabin clearly and the figure that now moved around the yard. Ihawi had ventured outside, apparently feeling secure enough to explore her surroundings. Gabriel watched as she examined the garden, long neglected but still producing a few hardy vegetables among the weeds. He should get back to work. The fence wouldn't fix itself. But he found himself observing her movements, careful, measured, those of someone taking stock of their environment. She moved like a healer, he thought, noting how she paused to examine certain plants, touching leaves and stems with knowing fingers. The sound of approaching horses snapped his attention away from Ihawi. 3 riders were approaching from the direction of town, dust rising from beneath their mounts' hooves. Gabriel recognized the lead horse immediately, a distinctive palomino belonging to Sheriff Clayton Morris. Cursing under his breath, Gabriel gathered his tools and headed back toward the cabin. He needed to reach Ihawi before they did. Morris wasn't known for his kindness toward native peoples. By the time he crossed the pasture, the riders were already dismounting in front of his cabin. Ihawi had retreated to the porch, her posture tense but dignified. She stood straight, chin lifted, though Gabriel could see the fear she was trying to hide. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Gabriel called out as he approached, deliberately casual. "What brings you all the way out here?" Clayton Morris was a tall man with shoulders broad from years of physical work before he had pinned on a badge. His face was weathered, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. At 55, he carried the confidence of someone accustomed to command and to being obeyed. "Reed," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Heard you made an interesting purchase in town yesterday." Gabriel set his tools down and moved to stand between the sheriff and the porch. "News travels fast." "Small town," Morris replied, his gaze shifting to Ihawi. "This her?" "This is Ihawi," Gabriel said pointedly. "She's my guest." Morris raised an eyebrow. "Guest? That what they're calling it these days?" He stepped closer, examining Ihawi with calculating eyes. "You know we've had reports of Apache raids 20 miles south? Burnt-out homesteads, dead settlers. She has nothing to do with that." "No." Morris turned back to Gabriel. "How can you be so sure, Doc? You just met her yesterday." Gabriel's jaw tightened at the use of his old title. "She was half dead when I found her. Bullet wound in her shoulder. Feet torn up from running. She's not raiding anyone." Morris glanced at the two deputies who had accompanied him. "Jenkins, Crawford, take a look around the property. Make sure our doctor here isn't harboring any other guests." The men nodded and moved off, one toward the barn, the other circling behind the cabin. "That's not necessary," Gabriel said, voice hardening. "Just doing my job," Morris replied. He turned his attention back to Ihawi. "Where's your tribe now?" Ihawi met his gaze steadily. "Gone." "Gone where?" "Dead. Scattered." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but Gabriel could see the pain she was suppressing. Morris studied her for a long moment. "You speak good English for a savage." Gabriel stepped forward. "That's enough, Morris." The sheriff's hand moved casually to rest on his holstered pistol. "Careful, Doc. Remember who wears the badge here." The tension between the two men was palpable, thick as the heat that shimmered above the hard-packed earth. Ihawi watched Morris carefully, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied his face. "Sheriff," one of the deputies called from behind the cabin, "found something you should see." Morris smiled thinly. "Excuse me." He moved past Gabriel, deliberately bumping his shoulder as he passed. Gabriel turned to Ihawi. "Stay here," he said quietly, then followed Morris. Behind the cabin, Deputy Jenkins stood beside a small patch of disturbed earth. At his feet lay several bundles of dried herbs in a small leather pouch. "Found these buried under a rock," Jenkins reported. "Indian medicine stuff." Gabriel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The items must have belonged to his late wife. Sarah had been fascinated by native healing practices and had collected various herbs and remedies. He'd buried her personal effects after her death, unable to bear the sight of them, but equally unable to throw them away. Morris crouched down, examining the pouch. He opened it, revealing a mixture of dried leaves and what appeared to be crushed bone. "Interesting," he said, looking up at Gabriel. "Care to explain?" "Old things," Gabriel replied, keeping his voice neutral. "From before." "Before what, exactly?" Morris stood, holding the pouch. Gabriel didn't answer. The less Morris knew about Sarah, the better. Her heritage had been a closely guarded secret during her life, necessary in a territory where mixed marriages could be met with violence. "I asked you a question, Doc," Morris pressed. "They belong to my wife," Gabriel finally said. "She's been dead 3 years." Something flickered in Morris's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. "Your wife collected Apache medicine?" "She was interested in all types of healing," Gabriel replied, the partial truth coming easily. "Now, if you've satisfied your curiosity, I'd appreciate it if you'd put those back and leave my property." Morris handed the pouch to Jenkins. "Take this as evidence." "Evidence of what?" Gabriel demanded. "Having dead plants on my land isn't a crime." "Maybe not," Morris conceded, "but harboring an Apache woman with known ties to hostiles might be." "Known ties?" Gabriel echoed. "She told you her people are dead." "And you believed her?" Morris laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Doc, for a smart man, you're being awfully naive." He gestured to Jenkins. "Bring the woman. We're taking her in for questioning." Gabriel stepped forward, blocking the deputy's path. "No." Morris's hand returned to his pistol. Don't make this difficult, Reed. I've got questions that need answering, and your guest is going to help answer them. She stays here, Gabriel insisted. She's under my protection. Protection? Morris moved closer, voice dropping so only Gabriel could hear. Or is she just another way to atone for what happened to Sarah? Another lost cause for the good doctor to save. His eyes held a knowing gleam that made Gabriel's blood run cold. Before Gabriel could respond, Ihawi's voice came from behind them. I will go. They turned to find her standing at the corner of the cabin, shoulder square despite the fear Gabriel could see in her eyes. Ihawi, no, Gabriel began. She silenced him with a look. I have nothing to hide. I will answer questions. Her gaze shifted to Morris, assessing him with the calm calculation of someone who had survived worse threats. Then I will return. Morris smiled, all teeth and no warmth. We'll see about that, miss. Gabriel moved to her side. If she goes, I go too. Suit yourself, Doc, Morris shrugged. Town could use a physician again, even a rusty one. He turned to his deputies. Get the horses. Our Apache friend can ride with Jenkins. As the deputies moved off, Gabriel leaned close to Ihawi. You don't have to do this. Yes, she replied quietly. I do. There is something wrong with that man. Something familiar. Her eyes held a certainty that gave Gabriel pause. I need to know. Know what? But Morris was returning, preventing further conversation. Let's go, folks. Got a nice cell waiting in town. As they mounted up, Ihawi behind Jenkins, Gabriel on his own horse, Gabriel caught sight of the ridge with its 7 unfinished fence posts. Monuments to intentions interrupted, to a life derailed by grief. Now watching Ihawi ride ahead of him, head held high despite returning to a town that had seen her sold like cattle just yesterday, Gabriel felt something stir within him that had been dormant for too long. Purpose. The journey back to Broken Ridge stretched longer than the actual miles. Dust rose in clouds around the horse's hooves, coating Gabriel's throat and stinging his eyes. He kept his gaze fixed on Ihawi's straight back as she rode in front of Deputy Jenkins. Despite her circumstances, she maintained a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength greater than the bonds that had held her. Morris led their small procession, occasionally glancing back as if to ensure his prisoners hadn't somehow vanished into the vast landscape. The familiarity with which he navigated the terrain suggested he knew this country well, perhaps too well. As they approached town, Gabriel nudged his horse forward until he rode alongside Jenkins and Ihawi. When we get there, he said quietly to her, let me do the talking. Ihawi's eyes met his briefly. Your words won't matter to him. Maybe not, Gabriel conceded, but I still have some standing in town. He can't simply make you disappear. A shadow crossed her face. Others have. Before Gabriel could respond, Morris called back, keep your distance, Reed. No conspiring with the prisoner. Gabriel fell back, a muscle working in his jaw. He hadn't fought for anyone or anything in years. The instinct felt rusty, almost foreign after so long spent in isolation. Yet here he was, preparing to challenge the town's authority for a woman he barely knew. Broken Ridge appeared on the horizon, a collection of weathered buildings shimmering in the late afternoon heat. People stopped their work to watch as the sheriff's party rode down Main Street, curiosity quickly turning to murmurs when they recognized Gabriel in the native woman from yesterday's auction. Morris dismounted in front of the jailhouse, a squat adobe building with barred windows and a heavy wooden door. Jenkins, take the woman inside. Crawford, stable the horses. He turned to Gabriel. You're free to go, Doc. Your presence isn't required. I'm staying, Gabriel replied, sliding from his saddle. Morris shrugged. Suit yourself. Just don't get in my way. Inside, the jailhouse was dimly lit and smelled of sweat, tobacco, and despair. 2 cells lined the back wall, empty save for straw pallets and buckets that served as crude toilets. Jenkins led Ihawi to the rightmost cell, unlocking the heavy door and gesturing her inside. She entered without resistance, her expression carefully neutral as the lock clicked shut behind her. Only then did she look at Gabriel, a silent question in her eyes. Now then, Morris said, settling behind a scarred desk and propping his boots up. Let's have a little chat. He fixed Ihawi with a hard stare. Where exactly did Blackwood find you? Near Yellow Creek, she answered, her voice steady. And what were you doing there? Running. Morris's eyes narrowed. From what? From men who killed my people. Your people, Morris repeated, a hint of mockery in his tone. The same people who've been raiding homesteads, killing white families, stealing livestock? Ihawi's chin lifted slightly. My people were peaceful. We traded with settlers. We did not raid. That's so? Morris leaned forward. Then explain why 3 farms south of here were burned to the ground last month. Why we found white women and children with their throats cut. Not by my tribe, she insisted. All you savages look the same to me, Morris countered. Gabriel stepped forward. That's enough, Morris. You have no evidence connecting her to any raids. The sheriff's cold gaze shifted to Gabriel. Stay out of this, Doc. This is official business. It's harassment, Gabriel replied. She was captured, abused, and sold. She's a victim, not a criminal. Morris stood slowly, his height allowing him to look down at Gabriel, despite their proximity. Funny how quick you are to defend her. Makes a man wonder what your interest really is. His eyes glinted. Or maybe I already know. Gabriel felt a chill run through him. Morris's words carried an implication he couldn't quite decipher, but the threat was clear enough. My interest is justice, Gabriel said evenly. Something that seems in short supply here lately. Morris smiled thinly. Justice is exactly what I'm after. He turned back to Ihawi. Where are the rest of your tribe hiding, the ones who escaped the incident? Something flickered across Ihawi's face. Recognition, then carefully concealed rage. She studied Morris more intently now, as if seeing him for the first time. I don't know, she said, each word measured. We scattered. I was alone when captured. I don't believe you, Morris replied. Your kind sticks together. Someone must know where you are, be looking for you. He moved closer to the cell. Tell me where they are, and maybe you walk out of here. Gabriel watched the exchange with growing unease. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was personal for Morris, though Gabriel couldn't understand why. Sheriff, he intervened, she's answered your questions. There's no legal basis to hold her. I'll determine that, Morris snapped. He turned back to Ihawi. You've got until morning to remember where your friends are hiding. Maybe a night in this cell will refresh your memory. With that, he strode to the door. Jenkins, stay here, keep an eye on them. He paused, looking back at Gabriel. You're welcome to wait outside, Doc, or go home. Your Apache friend isn't going anywhere. After Morris left, silence settled over the jailhouse, broken only by Jenkins shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The deputy was young, barely 20, with a patchy attempt at a beard and nervous eyes that darted between Gabriel and Ihawi. Gabriel moved to the cell, keeping his voice low. Are you all right? Ihawi nodded, then glanced meaningfully at Jenkins before responding just as quietly. That man, the sheriff, I know him. Gabriel's brow furrowed. How? His voice, she whispered. He was there, at the massacre. Before Gabriel could respond, the jailhouse door opened again, admitting an elderly man with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Harold Winters entered, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Brought some supper, he announced, nodding to Jenkins. Martha thought you might be hungry, son. Jenkins stood quickly. Mr. Winters, you shouldn't be here. Sheriff's orders. Now, Harold interrupted gently. My wife's been feeding this town's lawmen for 30 years, Sheriff Morris included. I doubt he'd begrudge you a hot meal. He set the basket on the desk. Besides, I need a word with Dr. Reed here. Professional matter. Jenkins hesitated, then relented as the smell of freshly baked cornbread reached his nose. I suppose it's all right. Just be quick about it. Harold gestured for Gabriel to join him near the door, speaking in hushed tones. Whole town's talking about this. Morris is on the warpath, says she's connected to the raiders. She's not, Gabriel replied firmly. I believe you, Harold assured him, but Morris has the mayor's ear. They're pushing for a formal investigation, maybe even a military response against any Apache in the territory. Gabriel's stomach tightened. Based on what evidence? Fear doesn't need evidence, son. You know that. Harold glanced at Ihawi, who was watching them with alert eyes. Martha's sending a plate for her too. It's in the basket. Thank you, Gabriel said, genuine gratitude in his voice. Harold nodded. Just be careful, Gabriel. Morris has never been fond of you, and now you've given him reason to act on it. He lowered his voice further. There's talk about Sarah, about what she really was. Gabriel felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Sarah's heritage had been their most closely guarded secret. If that information became public knowledge now, I should go before Morris returns, Harold said, clapping Gabriel gently on the shoulder. Martha will stop by later with blankets. Nights get cold in here. After Harold left, Gabriel remained by the door, his thoughts racing. If Morris knew about Sarah, or even suspected, it would explain his particular interest in Ihawi. It would also make their situation far more dangerous than he'd initially realized. Jenkins had settled at the desk, hungrily devouring the meal Martha Winters had prepared. Taking advantage of the deputy's distraction, Gabriel moved back to Ihawi's cell. "Eat something," he said, passing her the plate Harold had mentioned through the bars. She accepted it but didn't immediately begin eating. "The old man is your friend?" "As close to one as I have," Gabriel admitted. Ihawi nodded, thoughtful. "He has good eyes, honest." She finally took a small bite of cornbread. "The sheriff, Morris. You should not challenge him." "I can handle Morris." "No," she said with quiet certainty. "He is dangerous, more than you know." Gabriel studied her face, seeing the shadow of old trauma there. "You said he was at the massacre. How can you be sure?" Ihawi set her plate aside and moved closer to the bars, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When raiders came, I hid. I saw their leader, a man with a star on his chest and eyes like winter." She held Gabriel's gaze. "I heard his voice as he ordered his men to burn our lodges with people still inside. That same voice gave orders today." Gabriel felt cold despite the stuffy air of the jailhouse. "You're saying Morris led the attack on your village? That he's responsible for the deaths of your people?" "Yes." The word was simple, certain, heavy with conviction. Why would a sheriff lead a raid on an Apache village? That's military territory. "For this," she replied, reaching beneath her borrowed dress to withdraw a small object she'd apparently kept hidden even through her captivity and sale. She pressed it into Gabriel's palm, a smooth stone, deep green with veins of gold running through it. Gabriel examined it, puzzled. "What is it?" "The white man calls it copper, but the green kind, what grows with it. My people found many stones like this. The men with the star came looking for them." Her eyes held his. "They killed for these rocks." Understanding dawned. Copper ore, mixed with malachite. Gabriel closed his hand around the stone. "There are men who would kill for a mineral deposit like that." "Men like him," Ihawi affirmed. Gabriel pocketed the stone. "If what you're saying is true, Morris won't let either of us leave here alive, not if we know what he did." "Yes," she agreed simply. "That is why you should go. Leave me. Save yourself." The suggestion caught him off guard. "What?" "You have helped me already, more than most would, but this is not your fight." Gabriel was silent for a moment, staring at this woman who, despite everything, was trying to protect him. "Maybe it should be," he said finally. Their conversation was interrupted by Jenkins clearing his throat quickly. "That's enough talking. Sheriff wouldn't like it." Gabriel stepped away from the cell, mind working furiously to develop a plan. If Morris truly was behind the massacre of Ihawi's people, then her imprisonment wasn't just unjust. It was potentially fatal. Morris couldn't afford to leave witnesses alive, especially now that his secret was at risk of exposure. Night fell over Broken Ridge, bringing with it a chill that seeped through the adobe walls of the jailhouse. Martha Winters arrived as promised with blankets and a pot of coffee for Jenkins, who had been joined by Deputy Crawford for the night shift. The kind-hearted woman slipped Gabriel a small vial when the deputies weren't looking, whispering, "Laudanum. Harold thought you might need sleep." Gabriel thanked her with a nod, understanding the real purpose of the powerful sedative. Harold was providing him with a means of escape, should it become necessary. After Martha left, Gabriel settled onto a bench against the wall, pretending to doze while actually observing the deputies. Jenkins was young and inexperienced, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Crawford was older, harder, more loyal to Morris. Both were armed. Both would follow orders. Midnight came and went. The deputies took turns napping while the other kept watch. Gabriel waited, patient as only a battlefield surgeon could be, for the right moment. It came near 3 in the morning. Crawford had stepped outside to relieve himself. Jenkins was nodding off at the desk, head bobbing as he fought sleep. Gabriel moved silently to the coffee pot, still warm on the small stove, and emptied the vial of laudanum into it. When Crawford returned, Gabriel was back on his bench, eyes closed, breathing steady. "Coffee's still hot," Crawford muttered, pouring himself a cup. Jenkins roused himself. "Think I'll have some too. Getting too damn sleepy." Gabriel listened to them drink, counting minutes silently. Laudanum worked quickly, especially in men unaccustomed to its effects. Within 15 minutes, both deputies were slumped at the desk, breathing deeply in drug slumber. Gabriel moved swiftly, searching Crawford's pockets until he found the cell key. He unlocked Ihawe's door, pressing a finger to his lips when she looked at him questioningly. "We need to go," he whispered. "Now." She glanced at the unconscious deputies. "What did you do to them?" "They'll sleep till morning," he assured her, "but we won't have much of a lead." Ihawe hesitated. "Where would we go? He will hunt us." "I know," Gabriel acknowledged, "but we have a better chance if we can reach my cabin. Get supplies, horses." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Lead, and I will follow." They slipped out of the jailhouse into the darkened street. The town was quiet, most windows dark. Gabriel led them toward the livery stable, keeping to shadows. They would need horses. On foot, they'd never outpace pursuit. The stable was unlocked, its occupants nickering softly as Gabriel and Ihawe entered. Gabriel quickly saddled 2 horses while Ihawe kept watch by the door. "Someone's coming," she whispered suddenly. Gabriel froze, listening. Footsteps approached, uneven, shuffling. A moment later, Harold Winters appeared in the doorway, a rifle in one hand and a satchel in the other. "Figured you would try something like this," the old man said, though there was no reproach in his tone. "Here," he handed the satchel to Gabriel. "Food, bandages, ammunition, and this." He extended a folded paper. "Map to an old mining cabin in the high country. Morris doesn't know about it. It was abandoned years ago when the silver ran out." Gabriel accepted the items, momentarily speechless at this unexpected aid. "Why?" Ihawe asked, studying Harold intently. The old man's eyes softened. "Because I've seen what happens when good men do nothing." He looked at Gabriel. "And because you saved my Martha during the fever 3 years back. Never forgot that." Gabriel clasped Harold's shoulder. "Thank you." Harold nodded. "Get going. I'll try to buy you some time in the morning. Say you overpowered Jenkins and Crawford." They mounted quickly, leading the horses out the back way to avoid the main street. As they reached the edge of town, Gabriel glanced back at the cluster of buildings that represented civilization in this harsh territory. For 3 years, he'd avoided Broken Ridge as much as possible, retreating into solitude and grief. Now he was leaving it behind entirely, branded an outlaw for helping an Apache woman escape custody. The irony wasn't lost on him. His life had come full circle in ways he never could have anticipated. They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared in the darkness. By dawn, they had covered nearly 15 miles, the town far behind them, the landscape gradually changing from flat desert to rolling hills as they headed toward Gabriel's cabin. As the sun crested the eastern horizon, they finally stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream. Ihawe dismounted stiffly, her face drawn with exhaustion. The borrowed dress was dusty and torn in places from their hasty flight. "We should reach the cabin by midday," Gabriel said, offering her his canteen. She drank sparingly, then handed it back. "They will look for us there." "Yes, but we need supplies before we head into the high country. Food, proper clothing, medicine." He ran a hand through his dust-streaked hair. "It's a risk we have to take." Ihawe studied him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Why are you doing this?" The question caught him off guard. "Doing what?" "Risking your life, for me, a stranger." Gabriel looked away, uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "It's the right thing to do. Many men know what is right, few act on it." She moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes again. "There is more. I see it in your face when you think I am not looking." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, the only sound the gentle gurgle of the stream and the horses' soft breathing as they drank. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion he had kept buried for too long. "My wife, Sarah, she was half Apache. Her mother was captured as a girl raised by whites. Sarah passed as white her whole life, but she never forgot her heritage." He paused, the confession difficult after years of guarding this secret. When I saw you in that auction, bound and being sold like cattle, I saw what could have happened to her if her secret had been discovered. Understanding dawned in Ihawe's eyes. The medicine pouch. It was hers. Gabriel nodded. She collected healing practices from both worlds. Said true medicine shouldn't recognize boundaries. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at the memory. She was stubborn that way. What happened to her? Ihawe asked gently. Fever. 3 years ago. His expression darkened. I was a doctor, and I couldn't save my own wife, or our daughter. Emma was only 7. His hand clenched involuntarily. After that, I couldn't be a healer anymore. Every patient I looked at, I saw them. My failures. Ihawe was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out, her hand covering his clenched fist. When a person dies, it is not always because the healer failed. Sometimes it is simply their time to journey to the stars. The simple words, free of judgment, reached a place within Gabriel that 3 years of isolation could not touch. His breath caught. I should have saved them, he whispered. Perhaps, Ihawe acknowledged, but you are saving me now. Her warm hand remained steady on his. Maybe this is why our paths crossed. Gabriel truly saw her then, not as a victim or obligation, but as a woman of remarkable strength who had survived unimaginable horrors yet retained her compassion. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then a distant sound broke the spell, the faint thunder of hoofbeats, still far off but approaching. Riders, Ihawe said, pulling her hand away and standing alert. Gabriel rose quickly. They found our trail sooner than I expected. We need to move. They mounted swiftly, urging their tired horses to a gallop. The cabin was still hours away, and their pursuers were gaining ground with fresher mounts. Gabriel's mind raced, calculating distances and options. There's a canyon 2 miles east, he called to Ihawe. Narrow passage, easy to defend. We might be able to lose them there. She nodded, following as he veered eastward. The terrain grew rougher, rocky outcroppings rising from the earth like the bones of ancient beasts. The horses struggled, forced to slow to a careful trot as the ground became treacherous. The canyon appeared before them, a deep slash in the earth with steep walls rising nearly 100 feet on either side. A narrow trail descended into its depths, barely wide enough for a single horse. Down there, Gabriel directed. Single file. Careful on the descent. They had just started down the trail when a rifle shot cracked the air. A bullet whined off rock inches from Gabriel's head, showering him with stone fragments. Ride, he shouted, urging his horse forward. They plunged down the trail, dust billowing behind them as the horses scrambled for footing on the steep path. More shots followed, but the shooters were too far away for accuracy on moving targets. At the canyon floor, they raced along a dry stream bed, hooves pounding on sand and gravel. The walls rose around them, offering protection from gunfire, but also trapping them in a natural corridor with limited exits. Gabriel knew the canyon from hunting trips. It meandered for nearly 3 miles before opening into a broader valley. If they could reach that valley before their pursuers entered the canyon, they might have a chance to disappear into the rugged country beyond. They rode hard, the horses laboring under the pace and the uneven terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Morris and his men had reached the canyon entrance and were descending the trail. There, Gabriel pointed ahead to where the canyon widened slightly, a tumble of boulders creating a natural choke point. We can make a stand there if needed. They reached the boulders and dismounted quickly, leading the horses behind the largest rock formation. Gabriel unslung the rifle from his back, while Ihawe gathered loose stones for additional cover. How many bullets? She asked pragmatically. Gabriel checked the rifle and his revolver. 15, maybe 20. Not enough if it's a long siege. Then we make each one count, she replied, her calm determination steadying him. The sound of approaching riders echoed off the canyon walls. Gabriel peered around the edge of a boulder, counting. 5 men, Morris in the lead, all armed. The odds weren't good. Stay down, he instructed Ihawe. I'll try to hold them off, make them think twice about following. She touched his arm. We fight together. When he started to protest, she added, I can shoot. My father taught me. Gabriel hesitated, then handed her his revolver. 6 shots. Make them count. Ahawi checked the weapon with practiced hands, confirming it was loaded. The gesture reminded Gabriel that she was no helpless victim. She was a survivor, a fighter in her own right. The riders drew closer, slowing as they approached the narrowing of the canyon. Morris raised a hand, signaling his men to halt just beyond effective rifle range. "Reed," his voice boomed between the canyon walls. "We know you're there. Come out now. Bring the Apache woman. And maybe you lived through this." Gabriel remained silent, rifle ready. Beside him, Ihawi was equally still, her breathing controlled and even. "Last chance, Doc," Morris called. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Be reasonable." When no response came, Morris signaled his men to spread out. Two dismounted, taking cover behind rocks, while the others prepared to advance. "Remember," Gabriel said quietly to Ihawi, "aim for the horses if you can. They'll be stranded without mounts." She nodded, her focus absolute. The first rider moved forward cautiously. Gabriel sighted down his rifle, waiting until the man was within sure range. He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the canyon, and the rider's horse reared as the bullet struck the ground directly in front of it. The man struggled to control his mount, nearly falling. "Next one won't miss," Gabriel shouted. The rider retreated hastily. Morris and his men conferred briefly, then split up further, clearly planning to flank the boulder formation from multiple sides. "They're trying to surround us," Ihawi observed. Gabriel nodded grimly. "We can't stay here." He scanned their position, considering options. The canyon walls were steep, but not unclimbable. "There," he pointed to a narrow ledge about 30 feet up the eastern wall. "If we can reach that, we'd have the high ground." Ihawi assessed the climb. "Possible, but the horses? We'll have to leave them," Gabriel said reluctantly. "If we survive this, we can retrieve them later." She nodded, understanding the necessity. They gathered what supplies they could carry. The satchel Harold had provided, canteens, ammunition, and prepared to move. Gabriel fired 2 more shots to keep Morris's men pinned down. Then they dashed to the canyon wall and began to climb. The rock face was rough, offering decent handholds, but it was still a dangerous ascent with men shooting at them. Gunfire erupted as they were spotted. Bullets struck rock around them, sending fragments flying. Gabriel felt a sharp sting as a piece of stone sliced his cheek, but he kept climbing, Ihawi just below him. They reached the ledge, scrambling over the edge and pressing their backs against the wall. The position offered good cover and a commanding view of the canyon below. Morris and his men were visible now, looking up at their quarry with frustrated rage. "You're just making it worse for yourselves," Morris shouted up at them. Gabriel replied with a well-aimed shot that struck inches from the sheriff's boot, sending him diving for cover. For nearly an hour, they maintained their position, trading occasional shots with the men below. Neither side able to gain an advantage. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the canyon with punishing intensity. Water was becoming a concern. They had only what was in their canteens, and the day was hot. During a lull in the shooting, an Ihawi touched Gabriel's arm, pointing to the west. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, unusual for the season. "Rain comes," she said. Gabriel studied the clouds with concern. "Flash flood country. If those clouds open up, this canyon will fill fast." Below, Morris seemed to have reached the same conclusion. He gathered his men, and after a brief discussion, they began to retreat toward the canyon entrance. "They're leaving," Ihawi observed. "Not giving up," Gabriel corrected, "just changing tactics. Morris knows the danger of these canyons in storm season. He's cutting his losses, planning to catch us when we're forced out by the water." The retreating men took the horses with them, including Gabriel and Ihawi's mounts. The loss was a serious blow to their escape plans. "We need to move it before that storm hits," Gabriel said, gathering their meager supplies. "There's a way out further up the canyon, a side passage that leads to higher ground. If we can reach it before the rain comes." They descended carefully from their ledge, then began moving deeper into the canyon, away from where Morris and his men had retreated. The air grew heavy with impending rain, the smell of wet dust already rising though no drops had yet fallen. The side passage, Gabriel remembered, was a narrow crevice in the western wall, easily missed unless you knew where to look. They found it as the first distant rumble of thunder reached them, the storm drawing closer with alarming speed. Through here, Gabriel directed, squeezing into the opening. Ihawi followed, the passage so narrow they had to turn sideways to navigate it. The crevice wound upward, gradually widening until they emerged onto a rocky shelf about 50 feet above the canyon floor. From this vantage point, they could see the storm clearly, massive thunderheads building, lightning flashing within the dark clouds. "We need to get higher," Gabriel urged, eyeing the terrain ahead. The shelf continued upward, eventually connecting with the rim of the canyon proper. If they could reach the top before the deluge began, the first fat raindrops struck them as they climbed. Within minutes, the heavens opened completely, rain falling in sheets so thick it became difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The rock beneath their feet grew slick, threatening to send them tumbling back to the canyon floor. They pressed on, using every handhold, fighting against the increasingly treacherous conditions. Thunder boomed directly overhead, lightning illuminating their desperate climb in stark flashes of brilliance. "Almost there," Gabriel called over the storm's roar, reaching back to help Ihawi up a particularly steep section. Her hand clasped his, warm despite the cold rain. Together they made the final push, collapsing onto the canyon rim just as a wall of water began to surge through the passage below. The flash flood had begun, transforming the dry stream bed into a raging torrent in minutes. They crawled away from the edge, seeking shelter beneath an overhanging rock. Soaked to the skin, breathing hard from exertion, they huddled together against the storm's fury. "We made it," Gabriel said, his voice barely audible above the thunder and rushing water. Ihawi nodded, water streaming from her hair down her face. "Your cheek is bleeding," she observed, reaching up to touch the cut he'd sustained during their climb. "It's nothing," he assured her, though the concern in her eyes stirred something forgotten within him. They remained under the overhang as the storm raged, the shared warmth of their bodies the only comfort in the cold, wet wilderness. The closeness was necessary for survival, yet it carried an intimacy neither had expected. Ihawi's head eventually came to rest against Gabriel's shoulder as exhaustion claimed her. Gabriel stayed awake, keeping watch though it seemed unlikely Morris would brave the storm to continue pursuit. He studied Ihawi's face in repose, noticing for the first time the small scar at her temple, the proud line of her jaw, the dark lashes resting against her cheeks. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not in the conventional way valued by white society, but with a strength and grace that transcended cultural boundaries. The realization unsettled him. After 3 years of emotional isolation, this woman had somehow bypassed his defenses. Her eyes opened, meeting his. They looked at each other, the storm and danger momentarily forgotten. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits. Then she reached up, her fingers gently touching the cut on his cheek. "When storm passes," she said softly, "I will find herbs to heal this." The simple offer, healer to healer, brought an unexpected lump to Gabriel's throat. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They remained thus, caught in a moment of connection neither had sought, yet both now seemed unwilling to break, as the storm gradually spent its fury over the wild, untamed land they'd fled into. Beyond the shelter of their rocky overhang, the world was being transformed by the deluge, water carving new channels, washing away old marks, creating a landscape renewed. It seemed fitting somehow, a mirror to the internal transformation neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The storm continued its assault, but within their small shelter, something fragile and unexpected had taken root, something that, like the desert plants after rain, might yet blossom in the harsh environment that had tried to destroy them both. The storm surrendered to silence as abruptly as it had begun. Darkness crept across the land, the last rays of sunlight painting the clouds in crimson and gold before surrendering to the night. Water still rushed through the canyon below, but the flooded peaked, now beginning its gradual recession back to dry earth. Gabriel stirred, stiff from hours spent in the confined space beneath the overhang. Beside him, Ihawi slept, her breathing deep and even. Exhaustion had finally claimed her completely, the constant vigilance of survival momentarily suspended. He moved carefully, not wanting to wake her. Their situation remained precarious. They had survived the immediate danger of both pursuit and flood, but now faced new challenges. No horses, limited supplies, and the vast wilderness stretching in all directions. Morris would assume they had either drowned in the flash flood or escape to higher ground. He would be searching again by morning. Gabriel eased himself out from the overhang to survey their surroundings. The storm had left everything drenched, water pooling in rocky depressions and streaming down every surface. The air felt cleaner, though, the relentless dust temporarily settled by the rain. Stars emerged overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky. Gabriel oriented himself using the North Star, confirming what he already suspected. They had been driven far south of his cabin. Reaching it now would mean crossing open terrain, too risky with Morris and his men searching. Their best option was to continue into the high country, following the map Harold had provided to the abandoned mining cabin. Movement behind him announced Ihawi's awakening. She emerged from their shelter, stretching muscles cramped from the long confinement. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, voice husky. "Few hours," Gabriel replied. "Storms passed. We should move while we have starlight." Ihawi nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Which way?" Gabriel withdrew Harold's map from the oilskin pouch that had kept it dry. "Southwest, into the mountains. There's an old cabin, abandoned when the silver mine played out." "How far?" 20 miles, maybe more. 2 days on foot if we're lucky." She accepted this assessment without complaint, gathering what little they had while Gabriel studied the map more carefully. The cabin was marked in the foothills of what locals called the Serpent Mountains, a rugged range where few ventured. It would offer temporary sanctuary, at least until they could determine their next move. They set off under the stars, following game trails when possible, creating their own path when necessary. The going was slow, the ground treacherous after the rain, visibility limited to what moonlight revealed. They spoke little, conserving energy, each lost in their own thoughts as they navigated the wilderness. Near midnight, they paused to rest beside a small pool formed by the recent rain. Ihawi knelt at its edge, examining plants that grew nearby. "What are you looking for?" Gabriel asked. "Medicine," she replied, carefully harvesting leaves from a scrubby bush. "For your cut and other things we might need." Gabriel watched as she worked, her hands moving with the certainty of long practice. "You said you were a healer among your people." "Yes." She continued gathering, selecting only certain plants, leaving others untouched. "My grandmother taught me the old ways. Then the mission school taught me your medicine. I learned both." "Like Sarah," Gabriel said softly. Ihawi glanced up at him. "Your wife? She walked between worlds too?" "She tried. It wasn't easy. She kept much of herself hidden." "We all wear masks," Ihawi observed. "Some by choice, others because we must survive." The simple truth of her statement resonated with Gabriel. He had worn his own mask for years, the stoic recluse, hiding grief behind isolation, burying guilt beneath silence. Even now, there were parts of himself he kept hidden, truths he hadn't shared. Ihawi finished gathering plants and returned to his side, crushing leaves between her fingers to release their essence. "This will help the wound," she said, reaching up to apply the poultice to his cheek. Her touch was gentle but confident, a healer's touch. Gabriel remained still, acutely aware of her proximity, of the faint herbal scent that rose from the crushed plants, of the warmth of her fingers against his skin. "You have healed many," she observed, studying the cut with professional detachment. "Yes," he acknowledged. "Before." "Why did you stop?" The question was direct, without judgment. Gabriel looked away. "I told you, after Sarah and Emma died." "No," she interrupted gently. "The truth, not what you tell yourself." Her perception was unsettling. Gabriel had repeated his explanations so often, to himself, to others, that it had become a shield, a convenient narrative that protected him from deeper truths. "I was afraid," he admitted finally, the words difficult after so long unspoken. "Not of failing again, of succeeding, of continuing to live when they couldn't." Ihawi nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Survivor's guilt. My people have another name for it, the shadow that walks beside you." "How do your people cure it?" "They don't," she said simply. "You learn to walk with the shadow, to carry it without letting it consume you." She finished applying the poultice, her hand lingering briefly against his cheek. "You honor the dead by living fully. That is how they continue." Her words penetrated defenses Gabriel hadn't realized he still maintained. The idea that he might honor Sarah and Emma not through perpetual grief, but through embracing life, it was a concept both foreign and strangely compelling. Before he could respond, Ihawi stiffened, her head turning sharply toward the north. "Someone comes," she whispered. Gabriel listened, hearing what had alerted her, the distant sound of horses moving cautiously over rocky ground. Morris had not been deterred by the storm after all. "This way," Gabriel urged, leading her away from the pool into a dense thicket of juniper and sage. They crouched low, watching as riders appeared on the ridge they had crossed an hour earlier. 5 men, silhouetted against the night sky, scanning the terrain with methodical precision. "How did they find our trail so quickly?" Gabriel murmured. Ihawi's eyes narrowed. "The one on the right, he tracks like Apache." Gabriel studied the rider she indicated, a lean figure who rode slightly apart from the others, frequently dismounting to examine the ground. "A scout? Working for Morris?" "Yes, some of my people work for white men. Scouts, trackers. They have no choice if they want to live." The implications were clear. With an Apache tracker, their chances of escaping detection had just diminished significantly. They would need to be far more careful about leaving signs of their passage. They remained hidden until the search party moved on, following a false trail that veered eastward away from their actual route. Only when the riders had disappeared from view did Gabriel and Ihawi resume their journey, now moving with greater caution, taking pains to leave minimal trace of their passing. The night deepened around them. Clouds returned, obscuring the stars and making navigation more challenging. They pushed on, knowing that stopping for too long risked capture. Fatigue made their progress increasingly difficult, but fear provided sufficient motivation to continue. Dawn found them in rough, broken country, a landscape of jutting rock formations and deep ravines, sparsely vegetated but offering abundant hiding places. They took shelter in a narrow crevice between towering boulders, finally allowing themselves a few hours' rest while the sun climbed higher. Gabriel leaned back against stone, every muscle aching from the night's exertions. "We should reach the foothills by nightfall," he said, consulting the map again. "The cabins may be another half-day beyond that." Ihawi nodded, her own exhaustion evident despite her stoic demeanor. She had removed the makeshift poultice from Gabriel's cheek and was examining the cut with critical eyes. "It heals," she pronounced. "No infection." "Your medicine works," Gabriel acknowledged. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "All medicine works, if you understand it." She settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You should sleep first. I will watch." Gabriel wanted to protest, to insist that he could continue, but fatigue made the offer too tempting to refuse. "Wake me in 3 hours," he instructed, already feeling consciousness slipping away. "Then you rest." He was asleep before he could finish the sentence, descending into darkness so profound that not even dreams could penetrate it. He woke to Ihawi's hand on his arm, her expression urgent. "Riders," she whispered, "coming this way." Gabriel was instantly alert, sleep forgotten. The sun had moved across the sky. He had slept longer than the agreed 3 hours. "How many?" "3, not Morris, different men." Gabriel peered cautiously from their hiding place. 3 riders approached from the west, rough-looking men with the weathered appearance of those who live beyond civilization's boundaries. Prospectors, perhaps, or hunters. They showed no signs of being part of Morris's search party, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. "Stay hidden," Gabriel advised. "Let them pass." The riders drew closer, stopping at a small seep where water trickled from between rocks. As they dismounted to refill canteens, their conversation drifted to Gabriel and Ihawi's position. "Telling you, Jackson, that bounty's real. $500 for the doc, $1,000 for the Apache woman. Dead or alive?" "Didn't specify. Easy or dead, I reckon." Gabriel felt Ihawi tense beside him. Morris had placed bounties on their heads, substantial ones. Every mercenary and fortune hunter in the territory would be looking for them now. "Need to be careful," a third voice cautioned. "Heard Reed was an army surgeon, knows his way around a knife. And Apaches are tricky. This one's survived this long for a reason." 3 against 2, the first voice dismissed, "and we got the drop on them if we find them. Morris said they're headed for the high country, probably that old ghost town in Devil's Canyon." The men remounted, continuing their journey westward. Gabriel waited until they were well out of sight before speaking. They're searching the wrong area, he said with quiet relief. But there will be others. Many others, Ihawi agreed grimly. For that price. Gabriel's mind raced. The bounty changed everything. They could no longer risk seeking shelter at the mining cabin. It would be among the first places searched. They needed a new plan, somewhere unexpected to hide while they determined their next move. We can't go where Harold suggested, he said, refolding the map. Too obvious now. Ahawi studied him thoughtfully. Your cabin? Morris will have men watching it. Yes, she agreed, but perhaps that is why we should go there. Gabriel frowned. That makes no sense. They expect us to flee, to hide, not to return to the first place they would look. Her eyes held a strategic intelligence that reminded Gabriel she was the daughter of a tribal leader. We go when darkness comes, take what we need, then disappear before dawn. It was risky, perhaps foolishly so. But the alternative was to wander the wilderness with inadequate supplies, pursued by an ever-growing number of hunters. At least at the cabin they could obtain food, proper clothing, weapons, and medicines that might prove essential to their survival. It's 20 miles north, Gabriel said, considering. If we travel through the night, we might reach it before dawn, but we'd need to leave immediately after sunset. Ihawi nodded. Then we rest now. Conserve strength. They shared the last of their meager rations, jerky and hardtack from Harold's satchel, washed down with water from their nearly empty canteens. The food was barely sufficient to dull the edge of hunger, but it would have to sustain them until they reached the cabin. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they prepared to move again. Gabriel studied Ihawi as she readied herself, noting the determined set of her shoulders despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. She had endured capture, sale, imprisonment, and now a desperate flight across harsh terrain, yet she showed no signs of surrendering to despair. You're stronger than most, he observed quietly. She glanced at him, a question in her gaze. Most would have broken by now, he clarified, given up. Ihawi's expression softened slightly. My grandmother taught me, when the path is darkest, that is when you must be strongest. She adjusted the satchel strap across her shoulder. Besides, I am not alone on this path. That makes it easier to walk. The simple acknowledgement of their shared journey affected Gabriel more deeply than he expected. For 3 years, he had walked his path in solitude, bearing grief and guilt as solitary burdens. Now, unexpectedly, he found himself walking alongside another, not just physically, but in deeper, less tangible ways. They set off as the sun touched the western mountains, bathing the landscape in golden light that gradually surrendered to the encroaching darkness. Their pace was steady but cautious, always alert for signs of pursuit. The terrain grew more familiar as they moved northward, Gabriel recognizing landmarks from hunting expeditions. Night fell completely, the darkness profound without moon or stars to guide them. They navigated by instinct and memory, Gabriel leading them along ridge lines and dry washes that offered the most direct route toward his cabin. They spoke little, conserving energy and maintaining vigilance. The night was alive with sounds, coyotes hunting in the distance, the soft hoot of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Ordinary sounds of a wilderness night, yet each one carried potential danger, the possibility of human hunters moving through the darkness. Near midnight, they paused to rest in the shelter of a rock overhang. Gabriel's water was gone, his canteen empty. Ihawi silently offered hers the last few precious swallows. He accepted with a nod of thanks, rationing it carefully before returning the canteen. We're making good time, he said. Should reach the cabin an hour or so before dawn. Ihawi nodded, then stiffened suddenly, her head turning toward the north. Fire, she said, nostrils flaring slightly. Wood smoke. Gabriel sniffed the air, detecting nothing at first, then catching the faint scent she had identified. You're right. Could be a campfire or your cabin, she finished, understanding in her eyes. Dread settled in Gabriel's stomach. If someone had started a fire in his stove, it meant the cabin was occupied. Morris might have stationed men there, anticipating their possible return. We need to be sure, he said, but we'll have to be careful. They continued northward with heightened caution, using every available cover, moving in short bursts between concealing features of the landscape. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and eventually a faint glow became visible in the distance. Light from a window, perhaps, or a lantern outside. As they drew closer, the cabin took shape against the night, a dark silhouette with a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. A single light burned inside, visible through the window. They crouched behind a cluster of boulders about 200 yards from the cabin, observing. A horse was tethered outside, just one, not the multiple mounts that would indicate a larger party. One man, Gabriel whispered, probably a lookout. Ihawi studied the scene intently. Or a bounty hunter, waiting. Either possibility posed a significant threat. They needed supplies from the cabin, but approaching with an armed man inside was extremely dangerous. We could wait, Gabriel suggested. Watch until he leaves. He won't leave, Ihawi replied. Not if Morris ordered him to stay, not with the bounty. She was right, of course. Anyone stationed at the cabin, whether Morris's deputy or a bounty hunter, would have strong motivation to remain. Then we need to draw him out, Gabriel decided. Get him away from the cabin long enough for one of us to get inside, gather what we need. They formulated a plan quickly, simple by necessity, risky by nature. Ihawi would create a diversion east of the cabin, drawing the occupant's attention and hopefully luring him outside. Meanwhile, Gabriel would circle around and enter through the rear window, collecting essential supplies while the man was distracted. As plans went, it had numerous potential failure points, but neither could devise a better alternative given their limited resources. They separated, Ihawi moving east while Gabriel circled west, both using the darkness for cover. Gabriel watched as she disappeared into the night, a shadow among shadows. He felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion, concern for her safety, fear of what might happen if their plan went awry. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on his task. Circling wide around the cabin, he approached from the rear where a small window overlooked what had once been Sarah's garden. The window was unlatched. He had never seen the need for securing it, living so far from town. Gabriel waited, watching for Ihawi's signal. Minutes stretched, tension building with each moment of silence. Then it came, a series of sharp cracks like branches breaking, followed by a rustling that suggested something large moving through brush. The reaction was immediate. Light flared inside the cabin as a lantern was raised. A man's shape appeared at the front window, peering out toward the source of the disturbance. After a moment's hesitation, the door opened, and the figure emerged, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" a gruff voice called. "Show yourself!" More rustling came from the darkness, drawing the man further from the cabin. Gabriel recognized the ruse. Ihawi was creating the impression of movement without actually revealing herself, using the man's imagination against him. When the man had moved about 30 yards from the cabin, Gabriel made his move. He eased the window open and slipped inside, landing softly on the wooden floor. The cabin's interior was dimly lit by the dying fire in the stove and the lantern the man had left on the table. Working quickly, Gabriel gathered what they needed most: his medical bag from beneath the bed, ammunition for the rifle, preserved food from the pantry, a canteen of water, and warmer clothing for both of them. He stuffed everything into a canvas pack, aware that each passing second increased the danger. Outside, the man's voice came again, more insistent. "I know someone's out there. Come out now, or I start shooting." Gabriel finished gathering supplies and moved back to the window. As he prepared to exit, something caught his eye: the small wooden box on the high shelf containing Sarah's wedding band, Emma's doll, and the daguerreotype. After a moment's hesitation, he took the box and added it to the pack. He was about to climb through the window when a shot rang out, followed by a curse. The man had apparently lost patience and fired at shadows. Gabriel froze, listening. Footsteps approached the cabin, the man returning, presumably to reload or gather additional ammunition. Gabriel had only seconds to make his escape. He slipped through the window just as the cabin door opened, dropping to the ground outside and pressing himself against the wall. Inside, the man moved around, muttering to himself. "Damn coyotes, probably. Getting jumpy out here alone." Gabriel eased away from the cabin, staying in the deepest shadows, making his way toward the rendezvous point he and Ihawi had established, a distinctive juniper tree about a quarter-mile north of the cabin. He reached it without incident, but found no sign of Ihawi. Minutes passed, each one increasing his concern. Had she been captured? Injured? The possibility that she might have abandoned him crossed his mind briefly, but he dismissed it. They had come too far together for such betrayal. Just as he was considering returning to search for her, a soft sound alerted him to movement nearby. Ihawi materialized from the darkness, moving with the silent grace of one accustomed to traveling unseen. "You're late," he whispered, relief making the words harsher than intended. "I had to circle wide," she explained. "He nearly saw me when he fired." Gabriel noticed a dark stain on her sleeve. "You're hurt." She glanced down dismissively. The bullet passed through brush, just a scratch from wood splinters. Despite her assurance, Gabriel made a mental note to check the injury once they were safely away. "We should move." He may decide to patrol the perimeter. They traveled north, putting distance between themselves and the cabin as quickly as possible. The pack Gabriel had filled was heavy but necessary, the supplies inside potentially the difference between survival and death in the days ahead. When they had gone several miles, they paused to rest and assess their situation. Gabriel opened the pack, showing Ihawi what he had managed to salvage. "Food enough for a week if we're careful," he said. "Water, ammunition, medical supplies. And these, or he held up 2 items, a compass and a detailed map of the territory that had been tucked into his medical bag. Ihawi examined the map with interest. "Where do we go now?" It was the question Gabriel had been pondering since their original destination had been compromised. They couldn't stay in this territory, not with Morris's influence and the bounties on their heads. They needed to go somewhere beyond his reach. "Here," he said finally, pointing to a location on the map. "The Colorado Territory. Morris has no authority there, and it's far enough that bounty hunters might think twice about following." "How far?" 100 miles, maybe more. Through rough country. Ihawi studied the route he indicated, her expression thoughtful. "That would take us near the Black Mesa." "Yes, why?" She hesitated, then reached into a small pouch tied at her waist, withdrawing the green stone she had shown him in the jailhouse. "There are more of these there. Many more. It is where my people were when the attack came." Understanding dawned. "The copper deposit Morris is after." She nodded. "He knows it is there, but not exactly where. That is why he hunts survivors. To find it." Gabriel considered this new information. Black Mesa was directly on their route to the Colorado Territory. It was also likely to be an area Morris would search intensively, given his interest in the copper deposit. "It would be dangerous," he said. "Morris might anticipate us going there." "Yes," Ihiwi agreed, "but it is also where some of my people may have escaped to, hidden caves known only to the Apache." The possibility of finding survivors of her tribe, perhaps family members she had thought lost, was clearly significant to her. Gabriel could see the hope in her eyes, carefully contained but present nonetheless. "Then we go to Black Mesa," he decided. "Find your people if they're there. Then continue to Colorado." Relief softened her features momentarily. "Thank you." They rested for a few hours, sharing a small portion of the food Gabriel had brought. As dawn approached, they moved again, now heading northeast toward Black Mesa, a journey that would take them through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the territory. The day passed in a grueling cycle of travel and brief rest, always alert for signs of pursuit. The landscape gradually changed, becoming more rugged, rocky outcroppings giving way to steeper formations as they approached the mesa country. By evening, they had covered nearly 20 miles, a remarkable distance given their exhaustion and the difficult terrain. They made camp, if such a minimal stopping place could be called that, in a shallow cave formed by an overhanging ledge. Gabriel built a small, smokeless fire using dry sage, just enough to ward off the desert night's chill. They ate sparingly, conserving their limited supplies, then settled side by side against the cave wall. "We should reach the base of Black Mesa by tomorrow evening," Gabriel said, studying the map by firelight. Ihawi nodded, her gaze fixed on the small flame. "My father would bring us there in summer, when the juniper berries ripened." Her voice carried a wistfulness rarely present in her typically pragmatic speech. "He said the mesa was the backbone of the earth, holding up the sky." Gabriel watched her as she spoke, struck by the rare glimpse into her past. "You miss him." "Yes." She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "He died in the attack. I saw it happen. He fought so others could escape." I'm sorry, Gabriel offered, the words inadequate but sincere. She acknowledged his sympathy with a slight nod. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me to be strong, to lead if necessary. A faint smile touched her lips. He did not expect a daughter who would study medicine instead of war. But he supported your choice? Eventually. Her expression grew distant, remembering. He said healing was another kind of strength, one our people needed. Gabriel understood that sentiment all too well. Medicine was indeed a form of strength, one he had abandoned when grief had overwhelmed him. One he was perhaps beginning to reclaim in small ways through this journey with Ihawi. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire died to embers, each lost in private thoughts. Gabriel's mind turned to the path ahead, the dangers they still faced, the uncertain future that awaited them. If they reached Colorado, what then? Would Ihawi continue on her own way? The thought left him with an unexpected hollowness. He glanced at her, noting how the firelight cast her profile in sharp relief against the darkness of the cave. She had become more than just someone he had rescued on impulse. She had become a companion, a partner in their shared flight. Perhaps something more, though he hesitated to name it. You should sleep, Ihawi said, breaking the silence. I will take first watch. Gabriel wanted to protest but knew she was right. They would need every ounce of strength for the challenges ahead. He settled against the cave wall, the day's exertions quickly pulling him toward sleep. His last conscious thought was of Sarah. For the first time in 3 years, thinking of her brought not just pain, but a bittersweet warmth. She would have approved of Ihawi, he realized. She would have understood his need to help her. Perhaps this was what Ihawi had meant about honoring the dead by living fully. They reached Black Mesa the following evening, just as dusk was gathering. The massive formation rose like a fortress from the surrounding plains, its sheer cliffs seemingly impenetrable. How do we get up there? Gabriel asked, surveying the imposing walls of stone. There are paths, Ihawi replied, hidden trails. We must reach the eastern face before dark. They skirted the base of the mesa until they reached its eastern side. There, as twilight deepened the shadows, Ihawi led them to what appeared to be a solid rock face partially concealed by scrubby vegetation. Here, she said, pushing aside branches to reveal a narrow crevice in the cliff, barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. Gabriel studied the opening dubiously. That's the trail? The beginning of it, she confirmed. It widens inside. My people made it difficult to find for a reason. She entered first, disappearing into the shadowy passage. Gabriel followed, squeezing through the narrow entrance into a twisting corridor that indeed widened slightly once they were a few yards in. The fading daylight quickly gave way to near total darkness as the passage curved deeper into the mesa. How can you see where you're going? Gabriel asked, one hand on the rough stone wall to guide himself. I don't need to see, Ihawi replied from somewhere ahead. I remember. Count steps. Feel the way. They continued through the darkness, the passage occasionally narrowing or requiring them to climb short, steep sections. Gabriel lost all sense of direction, trusting entirely in Ihawi's memory and instincts. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 30 minutes, a faint glow appeared ahead, moonlight filtering through an opening. They emerged onto a narrow ledge partway up the mesa's eastern face, with the path continuing upward along a natural fault in the cliff. We rest here briefly, Ihawi decided, then continue to the top. They sat on the ledge, legs dangling over the precipice, the vast desert spread out below them. Stars were appearing in the darkening sky, brilliant and countless in the clear air. Despite their precarious circumstances, Gabriel felt a moment of profound peace, a sense of being removed from the world and its dangers, if only temporarily. Ihawi sat beside him, her face turned upward to the stars. My grandmother said those lights are the fires of those who have gone before. They watch over us, guide us home. A beautiful thought, Gabriel said softly. The remainder of the climb was challenging but manageable, the path growing slightly wider as they ascended. Finally, they reached the top, emerging onto the flat expanse of the mesa proper, a world unto itself with scattered juniper trees, rocky outcroppings, and open stretches of scrubby grass. Ihawi oriented herself quickly, pointing toward the northern end of the mesa. The caves are there, half an hour's walk. They moved across the mesa top, alert despite the apparent isolation of their position. If Morris had discovered this place, as Ihui feared, there might be men stationed here as well. The caves, when they reached them, were nearly invisible, narrow openings in a rocky ridge that rose slightly above the surrounding plateau. Ihui approached cautiously, examining the ground near the entrances. "Someone has been here," she said, pointing to faint scuff marks in the dust. "Recently." Hope and apprehension mingled in her voice. These might be signs of her people or of those hunting them. Gabriel unslung his rifle, ready for either possibility. Ahawi moved to the largest cave entrance and made a soft, distinctive sound, like the call of a nightbird, but with a pattern that seemed deliberate rather than random. She waited, then repeated it. Silence answered her. She tried again, her expression growing increasingly tense as no response came. "They should answer," she said, voice tight with worry. "If they are here, they would answer." Gabriel placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. The absence of response didn't necessarily mean disaster. Her people might have moved on, found safer shelter elsewhere. Ihawi stepped into the cave entrance, Gabriel close behind. The interior was pitch black, impossible to navigate without light. "We need a torch," Gabriel said. Ihawi nodded, stepping back outside to gather dry branches from a nearby juniper. Using materials from Gabriel's pack, they constructed a makeshift torch, lighting it with matches preserved in a waterproof container. The flickering light revealed a cave larger than expected, extending deep into the mesa. Signs of recent habitation were immediately evident. Cold fire pits, storage areas carved into the walls, sleeping pallets of dried grass. "They were here," Ihawi confirmed, examining the abandoned items. "Not long ago." She moved deeper into the cave, torch held high, searching for clues to what had happened. Gabriel followed, noting details that suggested a hasty departure. Personal items left behind, food stores partially intact. At the back of the main chamber, Ihawi suddenly stopped, a small sound escaping her. Part gasp, part moan. Gabriel moved quickly to her side, raising his rifle, unsure what had caused her reaction. The torch illuminated a scene that explained her distress. Blood stained the cave floor in dark patches, already dried to rusty brown. A broken bow lay nearby, alongside scattered arrows and a knife with a distinctive bone handle. "My father's," Ihawi whispered, kneeling to touch the knife with trembling fingers. "He would never leave this willingly." Gabriel surveyed the scene with a surgeon's clinical eye, assessing what might have happened. There was a struggle, but no bodies. "They were taken," Ihawi said, voice hollow, "or killed and removed. Or some escaped," Gabriel countered gently. "Look, there's a passage leading deeper." He pointed to a narrow opening in the rear wall, barely visible in the torchlight. Ihawi rose, hope returning to her expression. "Yes, the inner caves, sanctuary places." She moved toward the opening, torch extended. "We must check." The passage was narrow but navigable, descending at a gentle angle deeper into the mesa. They followed it for several hundred yards, emerging into another chamber smaller than the first, but clearly prepared as a refuge. Water containers, preserved food, blankets all stored with careful precision. No blood stained this chamber's floor. No signs of struggle marred its ordered appearance. But neither were there any people. The sanctuary stood empty, waiting for occupants who had not arrived. Ihawi's shoulders slumped, the torch lowering in her hand. "They did not make it here," she said softly. "We don't know that," Gabriel replied. "They might have used this place and moved on, sought safer ground." She shook her head, unconvinced. "Without the supplies? Without water?" She gestured to the carefully stored provisions. "No, something happened before they could reach sanctuary." Gabriel had no argument against her logic. The evidence suggested her assessment was correct. Her people had been captured or killed before they could reach this inner chamber. "I'm sorry," he said, simply. Ahawi nodded, accepting his sympathy with quiet dignity. She moved through the chamber, examining the stored items, finally selecting a water container and several packages of preserved food. "We should use what is here," she said practically, though her voice remained heavy with disappointment. "They would want that." They gathered what they could carry, refilling their canteens from the water stored in clay vessels. Gabriel found a supply of medicinal herbs carefully wrapped in cloth, remedies similar to those Sarah had collected, identified by symbols painted on their containers. These might prove useful, he said, adding them to his pack. Ihawi nodded agreement, then paused as something caught her eye. She moved to a small recess in the wall, withdrawing a leather pouch similar to the one Morris had confiscated at the cabin. Medicine bundle, she explained, opening it carefully. Inside lay several small objects, a carved wooden amulet, feathers, stones including several pieces of the green copper ore she had shown Gabriel earlier. My grandmother's, left for whoever might come. She tucked the bundle into her clothing, close to her heart. Its recovery seemed to give her strength, straightening her shoulders despite the disappointment of finding no survivors. A sudden noise from the passage behind them made both freeze. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching steadily. Extinguish the torch, Gabriel whispered, raising his rifle. Ihawi quickly smothered the flame against the stone floor, plunging them into darkness. They pressed against the wall beside the entrance, Gabriel's finger on the trigger, Ihawi clutching her father's knife. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied now by the flickering glow of approaching torchlight. Voices reached them, low and cautious. Check the main cave already. Nothing but blood and broken weapons. Keep looking. They have to be somewhere. Morris, Gabriel would have recognized that voice anywhere. How had he found them so quickly? There's another passage here, a different voice called. Leads deeper. The torchlight grew brighter as the men approached the chamber. Gabriel tensed, preparing to fire as soon as the first figure appeared. Beside him, Ihawi's breathing was controlled, measured, the calm of a warrior facing battle. The first man to enter was not Morris, but one of his deputies, Crawford, if Gabriel remembered correctly. The man had barely stepped into the chamber when Gabriel's rifle cracked, the sound deafening in the confined space. Crawford staggered, clutching his shoulder, his torch falling to the ground. Ambush! Someone shouted from the passage. More men pushed into the chamber, firing blindly toward the muzzle flash of Gabriel's shot. Bullets struck stone, sending fragments flying. Gabriel and Ihawi were already moving, ducking behind a large storage container as return fire filled the air. There's another way out, Ihawi hissed, pointing to a dark crevice barely visible in the far wall. Emergency escape route, leads to the western face. They crawled toward it, keeping low as more shots rang out behind them. Gabriel fired twice more, not aiming to kill but to buy time, to keep Morris and his men pinned down long enough for them to reach the escape route. The crevice was even narrower than the entrance passage, forcing them to squeeze through sideways, Gabriel going first to clear the way. The passage twisted sharply downward, then leveled out into absolute darkness. They moved by touch alone, feeling their way along rough stone walls. Behind them, shouts and the sound of pursuit grew fainter, then stopped entirely. Either Morris's men had lost the passage in the darkness, or they'd chosen not to follow, perhaps fearing an ambush in the unfamiliar terrain. How far does this go? Gabriel whispered. All the way through the mesa, Ihawi replied, her voice close behind him. It narrows ahead. Be careful. The warning came just in time. Gabriel's outstretched hand encountered a sharp drop-off where the passage floor suddenly disappeared. He froze, heart hammering. There are handholds, Ihawi said, reaching past him to guide his hand to a narrow ledge, like a ladder carved into the rock. Feel for them. The descent was harrowing, 50 feet or more of blind climbing, each handhold and foothold found by careful probing in the absolute darkness. A single misstep would mean a fatal fall. Gabriel moved with deliberate precision, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air of the passage. When they finally reached level ground again, the passage began to lighten faintly. Ahead, Gabriel could make out a dim glow, starlight filtering through an opening. They emerged onto a narrow ledge on the western face of the mesa. The vast desert spread out below them, silver under moonlight. We need to keep moving, Gabriel said, scanning the landscape for signs of pursuit. Morris will have men watching all around the base. There's a path, Ihawi replied, pointing to a barely perceptible trail that zigzagged down the cliff face. It joins a canyon that leads away from the mesa. We can follow it to the northwest. The descent was dangerous but manageable, their progress aided by the bright moonlight that illuminated the western face of the mesa. They reached the canyon floor without incident, moving quickly along its winding course, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Black Mesa. By dawn, they had covered several miles, the mesa now a dark silhouette against the lightening eastern sky. They found shelter in a small side canyon, collapsing with exhaustion behind a tumble of boulders that hid them from casual observation. How did Morris find us so quickly? Gabriel wondered, passing a canteen to Ihawi. We were careful, left no trail. She took a small drink before answering. The tracker. He must have followed our trail to the mesa, then known about the caves. An Apache scout who knew the secret paths? Gabriel frowned. That's not loyalty to a white man's badge. That's betrayal. Or survival, Ihawi countered quietly. Sometimes choices are not between good and evil, but between different kinds of death. Gabriel considered this, recognizing the wisdom in her words. Who was he to judge another's choices when he had never faced their circumstances? We should rest, he said finally. A few hours at least, then continue toward Colorado. Ihawi nodded, settling against a boulder, her face drawn with fatigue and the deeper weariness of lost hope. The disappointment of finding no survivors at the caves weighed on her, Gabriel could see. For her, Black Mesa had represented not just a waypoint on their journey, but a chance, however slim, of reconnecting with her people. I'm sorry, he said softly, about your people, about not finding anyone. She was silent for a long moment, staring out at the lightning sky. My father used to say that as long as one Apache lives to tell the stories, our people live. A faint smile touched her lips. I am still here, so they live through me. Gabriel was struck by the resilience in her tones, not denial of grief, but a refusal to be defined by it. It was a perspective he had never managed to achieve in his own loss, though he recognized its truth. Get some sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. She nodded, exhaustion claiming her quickly. Gabriel remained alert, rifle across his knees, watching the canyon entrance for any sign of pursuit. His thoughts drifted to the journey ahead, the 100+ miles to Colorado, the challenges they would face, the uncertain future that awaited them. And Morris. The sheriff would not give up easily, not with so much at stake. The copper deposit was clearly valuable enough that he had been willing to massacre Ihawi's people for it. He wouldn't hesitate to kill 2 fugitives who knew his secret. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 3 days passed in a blur of constant movement, brief rest, and vigilant caution. They traveled mainly at night, using the stars for navigation, taking shelter during daylight hours when the risk of detection was highest. Their route took them northwest, following a series of canyons and ridgelines that offered both concealment and relatively easy passage. Signs of pursuit were frequent but distant. Smoke from campfires glimpsed on far horizons, the occasional glint of sunlight on metal that might have been a spyglass or rifle barrel. Morris had men searching, but they seemed to be casting a wide net rather than following a specific trail. The 4th day found them in a high valley between 2 mountain ridges, a sheltered place with a small stream providing fresh water. They had made better progress than expected, covering nearly 60 miles since leaving Black Mesa. By Gabriel's estimation, they were now less than 2 days' journey from the Colorado border. We should rest here today, Gabriel suggested as they settled in the shelter of a grove of stunted pines. You need to tend that wound properly. Ihawi glanced at her arm where the scratch from the bounty hunter's bullet had developed into an angry, inflamed gash. She had treated it with herbs from her grandmother's medicine bundle, but the injury clearly needed more thorough attention. It's not so bad, she insisted, though the tightness around her eyes betrayed pain she wouldn't admit. It will be if infection takes hold, Gabriel countered. I've seen men lose limbs from less. He opened his medical bag, laying out the supplies he would need. Clean bandages, alcohol, suturing needles and thread. It felt strange preparing to treat a patient after so long. His hands remembered the motions even as his mind questioned his ability. Let me see, he said, gesturing for her to move closer. Ihawi hesitated, then extended her arm. Gabriel rolled up the sleeve of her borrowed dress, revealing the full extent of the injury. What he had assumed was a simple laceration from wood splinters was actually a deep furrow where the bullet had grazed her upper arm, tearing muscle and skin. This needs stitching, he said after careful examination. It should have been done days ago. She met his eyes steadily. Would you have done this days ago? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? You left medicine behind, she said simply, after Sarah and Emma. Would you have been ready to return to it then? Gabriel considered her words, understanding the deeper question beneath them. Was he ready now? Could he trust his hands, his judgment when they had failed those he loved most? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm willing to try. For you. Something shifted in Ahawi's expression, a softening perhaps or recognition of the significance of his words. She nodded once. Then do what you must. Gabriel worked with careful precision, first cleaning the wound thoroughly, then stitching the torn flesh with small, even sutures. Ahawi remained perfectly still throughout the procedure, her only reaction an occasional tightening of her jaw when the needle passed through particularly sensitive tissue. When he had finished, Gabriel wrapped the arm in a clean bandage, securing it firmly but not too tight. How does it feel? Better, she said, flexing her fingers experimentally. Your hands remember their purpose. The simple observation struck deeper than she could know. For 3 years, Gabriel had denied his calling, buried the healer beneath grief and guilt. Yet here, in the wilderness, faced with necessity, his hands had indeed remembered their purpose. Thank you, he said quietly. Ihawi tilted her head slightly, questioning. For what? For trusting me, when I didn't trust myself. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, softening the warrior's vigilance into something warmer. That is what it means to walk alongside another. Sometimes we carry them. Sometimes they carry us. The rest of the day passed in relative peace. They ate sparingly from their supplies, now dangerously low despite what they had taken from the cave. Game had been scarce in the highlands, and neither had wanted to risk a hunting fire that might attract attention. As evening approached, Gabriel studied the map, planning their route for the night's journey. If we push hard, we could reach Colorado by tomorrow night, he said. Cross the border before dawn the day after. Ihawi nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains that marked the territorial boundary. And then? The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had dared address. What happened after they reached safety? Would they part ways? Continue together? And to what purpose? What destination? I don't know, Gabriel admitted. I hadn't thought beyond escape. Nor I, Ihawi said softly. For so long, survival was the only future I could see. And now? She met his eyes, something unspoken but unmistakable passing between them. Well, now I begin to see other possibilities. If we push hard, we could reach Colorado by tomorrow night, Gabriel said, studying the map. Cross the border before dawn the day after. Ihawi nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains that marked the territorial boundary. And then? The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had dared address. What happened after they reached safety? Would they part ways? Continue together? And to what purpose? What destination? I don't know, Gabriel admitted. I hadn't thought beyond escape. Nor I, Ihawi said softly. For so long, survival was the only future I could see. And now? She met his eyes, something unspoken but unmistakable passing between them. Now I begin to see other possibilities. A gunshot cracked in the distance, echoing across the valley. Gabriel tensed, reaching for his rifle. Someone's hunting nearby. They listened intently. More shots followed, then the distant sound of hoofbeats, fast, erratic, the rhythm of a horse being pushed hard. Someone's coming this way, Ihawi whispered, already gathering their few belongings. We need to move. But Gabriel held up a hand, listening more carefully. Not a group, just one rider. He frowned, being pursued. They took cover behind the trees at the edge of their small camp, weapons ready. Within minutes, a horse and rider burst into view in the valley below, racing toward the grove where they hid. The rider was bent low over the saddle, one hand clutching his side. As the figure drew closer, Gabriel felt a cold shock of recognition. Morris, he breathed, raising his rifle instinctively. The sheriff was alone, his face pale with pain or fear, possibly both. Blood darkened his jacket where he pressed his hand against his side. He's wounded, Gabriel observed. Good, Ihawi replied coldly. Fate has delivered justice where we hesitated. 3 more riders appeared at the far end of the valley, rifles raised. One fired, the bullet kicking up dirt near Morris's fleeing horse. Bounty hunters, Gabriel realized. They must have found him before he found us. Morris's horse stumbled, nearly throwing him. He regained control and drove the animal toward the trees, directly toward their position. He hadn't seen them yet, focused only on escape from his pursuers. "One shot," Ihawi whispered, her knife already in hand. "We can end this now." Gabriel's finger tensed on the trigger. Morris had massacred Ihawi's people. He'd hunted them relentlessly. But executing a wounded man, even one as deserving as Morris. Before he could decide, Morris's horse cleared the first line of trees. The sheriff's eyes widened as he spotted them, shock and recognition flashing across his pain-etched face. His mount reared, startled by the sudden encounter. Morris tumbled from the saddle, landing hard on the ground between them, his gun flying from his holster. When he looked up, he found himself staring into the barrels of Gabriel's rifle in the gleaming edge of Ihawi's knife. "Well," he gasped, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his side, "ain't this a fine situation?" Morris crashed into the trees 30 yards from their position, dismounting awkwardly, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. He staggered forward, unaware of their presence, seeking only escape from the gunfire behind him. When he stumbled into the small clearing where they had made camp, his eyes widened in shock at the sight of Gabriel and Ihawi, weapons trained on him. "Well," he gasped, blood seeping between his fingers, "ain't this a fine situation?" Gabriel kept his rifle leveled at the sheriff's chest. "You're a long way from your jurisdiction, Morris." The sheriff grimaced, pain twisting his features. "Came to finish what I started. Should have killed you both at the beginning." "Like you killed my people, Baal." Ihawi's voice was cold, her father's knife gleaming in her hand. Morris's eyes narrowed. "Your kind was sitting on a fortune without even knowing it. That copper deposit is worth millions." He coughed, flecks of blood appearing on his lips. "Should have taken the deal when the mining company offered it." "There was no deal," Ihawi countered. "Only threats, then slaughter." More gunshots sounded from the ridge, closer now. The bounty hunters were advancing, tracking Morris's flight. "Seems we all have the same problem," Morris said, a calculating gleam in his eyes despite his injury. "Those boys up there want all our scalps, mine for the badge, yours for the bounty." "You're suggesting we work together?" Gabriel couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Morris shrugged, wincing at the movement. "Enemy of my enemy, Doc. After you massacred her people? Put bounties on our heads?" Gabriel shook his head. "Give me one reason we shouldn't hand you over to them right now." "Because I know a way out of this valley they don't," Morris replied. "A mine shaft that runs under the eastern ridge, comes out 3 miles away." He grimaced again, leaning heavily against a tree. "And because I'm the only one who can testify about that copper deposit. Your Apache woman wants justice for her people? She needs me alive to tell the truth." Ihawi and Gabriel exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Morris was manipulating them, playing for his survival, but he might be right about needing his testimony for justice to be served. "We need to move," Gabriel decided. "Those hunters will be here any minute." He gestured with his rifle. "You first, Sheriff. Try anything and I won't waste time with words." Morris nodded, understanding the threat. "Mine entrance is this way, half-mile east." They moved quickly through the trees, Morris leading despite his injury, Gabriel and Ihawi flanking him with weapons ready. Behind them, voices carried on the evening air, the bounty hunters closing in on their trail. The mine entrance was where Morris had claimed, a dark opening in the base of the eastern ridge, partially concealed by brush and fallen rocks. It looked abandoned, timber supports rotting at the entrance. "Not exactly welcoming," Gabriel observed. "Better than a bullet," Morris replied, his face pale with blood loss. "Should still be stable enough. Company only abandoned it 10 years ago." Gabriel lit a small lantern from his pack, and they entered the tunnel single file. The air inside was stale but breathable, the passage narrowing as they moved deeper into the mountain. Old rail tracks ran along the floor, rusted with age and disuse. They had gone perhaps a quarter mile when Morris stumbled, nearly falling. Gabriel caught him reflexively, doctor's instincts overriding caution. "Need to rest," Morris gasped. His breathing labored. "Lost too much blood." Gabriel helped him to a sitting position against the tunnel wall, then examined the wound by lantern light. The bullet had entered Morris's right side, possibly damaging his liver. Without proper treatment, he wouldn't survive long. "I can bandage it," Gabriel said, "but you need surgery." Morris laughed weakly. "Bit late for that, Doc." While Gabriel worked to stanch the bleeding, Ihawi kept watch, her posture alert, knife ready in her hand. She had not spoken since they entered the mine, her silence more eloquent than words. This man had ordered the death of her father, her people. Now his life was in their hands. "Why did you do it?" Gabriel asked as he wrapped a bandage around Morris's torso. "You were a lawman, sworn to protect." Morris's eyes were fever bright in the lantern glow. "You have any idea what that copper is worth? Enough to buy a real life. Not this godforsaken territory where a man works himself to death for nothing." "So you murdered for money?" "I gave them a chance," Morris insisted. "Told their chief what we'd found on their land. Offered fair payment if they'd relocate." His voice hardened. "They refused. Said the land was sacred, part of their ancestors' bones." He shook his head. "Can't eat sacred. Can't build a future on ancestors' bones." "So you built yours on their blood instead," Ahoe said, speaking for the first time since entering the mine. Morris looked at her, something like regret flickering across his face. "War's been going on between our kinds since the first white man stepped a foot here. I just picked the winning side." Gabriel finished securing the bandage. "Can you walk?" Morris nodded, though doubt shadowed his eyes. "Far enough to get out at least." They continued deeper into the mine, the tunnel branching occasionally. Morris directed them at each junction, his voice growing weaker, but his certainty about the route unwavering. The air grew cooler as they progressed, suggesting they were nearing the other side of the ridge. After an hour of slow progress, a faint glow appeared ahead, moonlight filtering through the exit. They emerged onto a small ledge overlooking a different valley, the night air fresh after the stale confines of the mine. Morris collapsed as soon as they were outside, his strength finally giving out. Gabriel checked his pulse, weak but steady. The sheriff wouldn't die immediately, but without proper medical attention, his chances were slim. "What now?" Ihawi asked, looking at the unconscious man. It was the question they had both been avoiding. Morris was a murderer who deserved justice, but he was also the only one who could testify to the truth about what had happened to Ahawi's people. "We take him with us," Gabriel decided, "to Colorado. Turn him over to the federal authorities there." Ihawi's expression was skeptical. "And if they choose to believe a white sheriff over an Apache woman?" "They'll believe documentation," Gabriel replied, reaching into Morris's coat to withdraw the man's wallet. Inside, as he had suspected, were papers, including what appeared to be a contract with a mining company for the rights to copper deposits in Apache territory. Morris kept his insurance policy close. Understanding dawned in Ihawi's eyes. "Evidence," Gabriel nodded. "Enough to ensure justice, I hope." They fashioned a travois from branches in Gabriel's blanket, securing Morris on it for transport. The going would be slow, but the border was less than a day away now. If they could cross into Colorado before the sheriff's condition deteriorated too far, they might succeed in bringing him to justice. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, they set off, each pulling one end of the travois. The burden was heavy, but not as heavy as the truth they carried. A truth that deserved to be heard, to be acknowledged. "What happens after?" Ihawi asked as they walked. "After justice is done?" Gabriel considered the question. 3 days ago, he might not have had an answer, but now, looking at the woman beside him, strong, resilient, unbroken despite all she had endured, he found himself in imagining possibilities he had thought forever closed to him. "I don't know exactly," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out. With you, if you are willing." Ihawi didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. When she finally spoke, her voice held a warmth he had rarely heard before. "My grandmother said that sometimes the most important journeys begin only after we think we've reached our destination." She glanced at him, a smile touching her lips. "I would like to walk that journey with you," Gabriel read. The simple declaration settled something within him, a piece of his fragmented self finding its place again. For 3 years he had existed rather than lived, marking time in solitude and grief. Now, impossibly, He found himself looking toward the future with something that felt suspiciously like hope. They walked on, side by side, the unconscious form of their enemy carried between them, a burden necessary for justice, but temporary. Ahead lay the border, a new territory, new beginnings, and perhaps for two broken souls who had found unexpected strength in each other, the chance to build something neither had believed possible again. A home. 6 months later, Gabriel stood on the porch of a small cabin nestled in the foothills of the Colorado mountains. The structure was new, built by his own hands with help from neighbors who had welcomed the doctor and his wife without too many questions. The final touch had been completed that morning, a sturdy fence enclosing a garden where Ihawi had already planted herbs, both medicinal and culinary. 7 fence posts, all finished, a symbol of intentions fulfilled rather than abandoned. Inside, a small sign hung beside the door, announcing Dr. Reed and Mrs. Reed, Medicine and Healing. Word had spread quickly through the scattered community about the doctor who combined conventional medicine with native remedies, and the Apache woman whose knowledge of herbs and traditional treatments complemented his surgical skills. They weren't rich, but they were respected. And after the federal investigation triggered by Morris's testimony, given from a prison hospital bed where he still recovered from his wound, they were safe. The sheriff had been convicted of multiple crimes, the mining company sanctioned for its role in the massacre. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could bring back those lost, but it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. The door opened behind him and Ihawi stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Gabriel, then settled beside him on the porch bench. Mrs. Thornton's baby came early this morning, she said. A boy, healthy and strong. Gabriel smiled. Your 3rd delivery this month. The women trust you. They trust us, she corrected. Our medicines together. That morning, a young Apache mother from a neighboring settlement had also brought her child for treatment of a persistent cough. As Gabriel had prepared a remedy combining his medical knowledge with Ihawi's herbal wisdom, he'd caught sight of something that stopped him in his tracks. The sunlight streaming through the window had fallen on the child's face in a way that, for just a moment, reminded him of Emma. But for the first time, the memory brought a bittersweet warmth instead of searing pain. The sound of children's laughter drew his attention to the edge of their property. A small group had gathered by the garden, some from the settlement, others from ranches scattered across the valley. It had become a weekly tradition, these evenings when Ihawi would teach them about healing plants, while Gabriel shared stories of the human body's remarkable abilities. Some of the children showed real promise as healers. I had a letter from Harold, Gabriel said, sipping his coffee. He and Martha are considering visiting in the spring. Ihawi nodded. It would be good to see them. They helped us when few would. He says Broken Ridge is changing. The Army investigated the Apache massacre, concluded it was unprovoked. There's talk of reparations to survivors. If any survived, Ihawi said softly. Reed, called 10-year-old Thomas, the blacksmith's son, running toward the porch. Is it true that the Army is making the mining company pay money to the Apache people? Gabriel exchanged a glance with Ihawi. News traveled slowly out here, but it traveled. Yes, he answered. It's called reparations. It means acknowledging a wrong was done and trying to make it right. Can money make it right? Asked Maria, a quiet girl who had followed Thomas. No, Ihawi said gently, but acknowledgement can begin healing. Like setting a broken bone, first you must recognize the break before it can mend properly. The children nodded, accepting her wisdom with the simple trust of youth. After they departed for home, Gabriel reached for Ihawi's hand. I've been thinking about what your father said, about healing being another kind of strength. Ihawi looked at him, waiting. I received a letter from the medical college in Denver, he continued. They're interested in documenting our combined approaches. They want to publish a book. Her eyes widened. Your medicine and mine? Together? Our medicine, he corrected with a smile. 2 traditions, stronger together than apart. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar and precious. My father would be proud. Sarah and Emma too, I think. Gabriel looked out over their homestead, the completed fence, the thriving garden, the small clinic where 2 healing traditions had found common ground. The grief was still there, for Sarah, for Emma, for all he had lost, for Ihawi's father and her people. It would always be part of them, but it no longer defined them, no longer limited what they could become. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared above the mountains, Gabriel felt a peace he had thought lost forever. Not the absence of pain or memory, but their integration into something larger. The fence was finished, the garden was planted, and now the healing they had found within themselves was spreading outward, touching other lives, creating ripples that would continue long after they were gone. That, he reflected as Howie's hand tightened in his, was the most meaningful medicine of all.